Hey everyone, welcome back to Motion UX. Ivan Witteborg here. We're gonna jump into creating a dynamic text in a Lottie animation. Let's get started. To start out, we're gonna jump into Figma, and this is a little design that we've created. It's gonna be congratulating somebody that they've unlocked level 3, little emoji celebration here. So we're gonna go ahead and open up AEUX to send this over to After Effects. And if you're unfamiliar with this tool, please check out my Figma to After Effects workflow video. We're gonna set it over. We see we got our reference image over here and everything is lined up fairly well. So we're gonna go ahead and delete that. And we're not doing anything special with auto layout or anything. So everything's getting dumped in just as we want it. And I'm gonna go ahead and reorganize my layers so that they represent what we're seeing visually on screen here. For this specific animation, right, like we want to contain a very complex text animation within a Lottie file so that we take a little bit of the workload away from the developers and we get to do it on the animation and design side of things. And the part of this animation that we want to be dynamic is the user's name. So right now Milo Orion is in here and we want to be able to switch that out depending on who is using the app. And this could be something that happens every time the user has achieved a certain thing, unlocked a certain level, so on. The possibilities where you can use this specific treatment are really endless. So right off the bat, we're going to make sure that we're naming this something that we can find later on in the code. And so we're going to name it a class name of just dot username. And we have our emoji up there, congrats, all those sorts of things. So we're gonna go ahead and do a very quick animation on this. We're gonna do P for position, T for transparency. We're gonna set some keyframes down. We're gonna go forward in time about, maybe we'll do 40 frames here. Go back to the beginning of the timeline and we'll animate in from 0 opacity. And we'll come in from the bottom. And if we play that back, we can see this is happening. And we want to change to enter easing so that things jump on screen like we want it. Now we want to offset it a little bit. So we'll grab these frames. We can go ahead and hide the keyframes with U, zoom in a little bit, and we just want to offset it maybe 2 frames each. And so now we have a little bit of a staggered effect going on. So we could stop here, but we want to make this Milo Orion a little bit more interesting. And so we're going to go ahead and layer on top of this another text animation. So we're going to do position. We're also going to do opacity as well. There'll be a little bit of overlap, but that is okay. And we're going to do the opacity down to 0, and we're going to do the position a little bit lower as well. And what's nice about when you use a text animation is that you can affect all of the letters within the words one at a time. And let me show you what that does. And so right now I have this range selector. And if we actually go forward in time, you see that we can't see anything because it's positioned down and the opacity is 0. And so if I go ahead and move this start, you can see that, oh wow, look, it's animating on Milo Orion letter by letter. And so this is a little bit more interesting. So if we layer this on top of what's already happening, we're going to bring a little bit more focus, a little bit more excitement and anticipation to the customer or user's name. And so you can see that we can actually keyframe this specific property. So we'll go ahead and put it onto 0. We'll hit that stopwatch and we can tap U so we can see the other keyframes that we have here. And we'll just go ahead and line that up of where it's going to start and where it's going to finish. And if we go ahead and play that, you can see it plays and it's pretty quick. So let's go ahead and we can stretch this out a little bit more so it takes a little bit of a longer time. And we can go ahead and add some easing to it. And we can add some easing on the other side too. So here we go. We have a very simple animation that is pretty quick to create in After Effects, but may take a little bit longer for a developer to create it in code. And so that is the power of Lottie. We're able to reduce the level of effort and just make it really, really quickly here in After Effects. This is our animation. We got it. And we definitely want this to be on a transparent background when we export it in Lottie, and currently it is, as you can see here. The background color here was just imported as the composition background, but not an actual physical background layer when we imported things over from Figma. So now let's go ahead and check out Bodymovin to export this. And if you're not familiar with Bodymovin at all, please check out my Lottie video to get a little bit more info on what is Bodymovin and how do you use it. Screen. We want to set our destination folder to where we are currently working. So Lottie Dynamic Text, and we're going to do it here, and we're going to name it Dynamic Text. And you can see I've already done a little bit of it here, but we're just going to go ahead and replace it. And then we're going to go to the settings, and we don't need our fonts converted to shapes because we want it to use an actual font file. We're not bundling the font, and we're going to go down here and make sure we have demo turned on. This is really just for the purposes of this demo and for you as a designer animator to see how it looks locally when you've rendered it. And I want to set the background color of the actual HTML demo to something that's similar to what we have going on in our composition. And that is all we need. So we'll go ahead and save that. We'll hit render. It's rendering everything out, rendering the images. And you can see here, this is where we can select a font family or font path that we are using in this specific design. I'm using Acumen Pro from Adobe, but I'm not really worried about it being the exact font. If you were, you could link it to a specific URL. You could link it to a specific Google font or typekit if you wanted to. But right now, I'm just going to leave it blank and hit save. So we're going to go ahead and open up this folder. And you can see it created here, the dynamic text JSON file. And this is what we would hand to a developer for them to implement on their end. But then we also have this demo. And in this demo, we have our images that we exported with it. And for this instance, it's only this little emoji confetti. So you see we have our demo HTML. So we're going to go ahead and open this up. And you can see this is our animation that we created. And every time I refresh it, will restart the Lottie animation. And this Lottie animation will actually run for 5 seconds because that's what our composition window is set at. And so if you just leave it, it will replay on its own again and again and again. When you would actually hand this file off, you would want to make sure that whatever the last keyframe is, you would want to trim your composition to be exactly that so that you don't have a lot of extra time in this Lottie file. Because when you actually go to interact with that Lottie file, you can set a start and a stop. And so you can say on completion stop or on completion loop. And currently by default for the demo, so it's easier for you to view and preview and debug and troubleshoot and all those sorts of things, it's set to loop. So you can see it happening again and again and again. And so for our instance here, we have it looping, but it's at a 5-second composition window. So let's go ahead and open up this HTML in some sort of text editor. You could use something robust like a Visual Studio. For this case, I'm just going to open up Sublime Text. Right now you can see it's just an HTML file, and then dumped in here, all of this text is the Lottie JavaScript. And that is how this HTML knows to run and play this animation file. This right here, this is our actual animation data. So if we were to go back to this dynamic text JSON file, this is the same as all of this. It's just copy and pasted directly into the HTML just for the purposes of this demo. Typically, when you would implement a Lottie file, you would reference that specific JSON file. You wouldn't necessarily embed that within your application or web page or whatever. And then we see right here are all the parameters of how our Lottie player is going to work. And so you can see that it's going to loop, it's going to autoplay, it's going to render as SVG, all of those sorts of things. And it's referencing what is our animation data. Our animation data is this variable here. So the first thing we want to do is, if you remember in the beginning, we named our text layer .username. And so we can actually go in here and type in .username, and we can search, and look, we got username right here. And we want to look for, where does it say Milo Orion? You likewise could just go ahead and search for Milo Orion, and you would find it right here. And so this is the spot that we really want to focus on. And so if we go ahead and actually just edit this text to someone else like Tom Holland, and we save it, and we go back to our Lottie file, you can see it's still doing Milo Orion because it hasn't refreshed and loaded the new changes that we did to the HTML. So if I go ahead and refresh, you can see, look, it's doing Tom Holland. You can also see we're running into some text wrapping issues and this stuff is not moving around and all those sorts of things. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So now that we're able to change our text to Tom Holland, we want it to actually be like a variable so that it's a little bit easier for us to find and change. So if we do variable username equals, and we just can name this whatever we want. And so we can say this is now something else. Right now, it's not going to do anything because our actual animation data is not referencing that variable. But if we take this from quote to quote and we change it to username, now in this place, the text is referencing this variable, which this variable currently means something else. And for your developers, they can then take this variable and say, hey, this equals whatever the current user is and their first name and their last name. However your application or website is set up, you can reference that variable to whatever you need it to be and swap that out dynamically on load. And sometimes you can swap it out while the animation is actually running. So if I go ahead and save that, you can see now it's called something else. But we have a little bit of an issue here, right? Like we see this text is wrapping down. So let's go ahead and figure out why that's happening. If we go look at our After Effects composition and we check our text layer, you can see that our text bounding box stops and starts at this name. And so if we actually hold Command, if we scale this up and we hold Command, we can scale this all the way edge to edge. And you can see that my design is not perfectly centered. That's okay. And we go ahead and we center that text. Now we would be able to write it all the way to the edge. So let's go ahead and save that. We can go back to body moving. It's already selected with all the same settings that we had. So go ahead and hit render. We can continue with this. And then we open up the folder. And let's go ahead and open this up. And you can see it looks the same. We need to go back to our Sublime text. And you can see that Milo Orion has changed back. It erased all of our stuff. So this is one reason why you wouldn't want to have everything combined into one file when you're in production, because you update the animation often if you're testing it in those environments. And if you need to update it for version 2, version 3, or whatever, you want to make sure that you're referencing that external Lottie file so that it's easy to change. So let's go ahead and first create our variable username that equals something else. And we'll go back in here for Milo Orion and we'll reference the variable username. We'll save it, go back to this, and we'll refresh. And now we see it doesn't wrap. And that is because there is an actual bounding box that sits within this Lottie file that it tells it, hey, wrap when it meets this point. If we go ahead and we add and more and we refresh, you can see that it still wraps at a certain point because like this is the width of our device screen, whatever it is. And you can see it wraps when it gets to a certain point. And so this is when you would need to incorporate some like if-else logic of if this is a person's name and their first and last name takes up more than X amount of characters, only show the first name. If the first name takes up this amount of characters, scale the type size down, something like that so that you can make sure that you're accounting for all those edge cases. But maybe you're also asking like, hey, is there any way to make this other line responsive to what's happening above? And I think this is where we start running into the limitations of Lottie. You could craft a clever expression in After Effects that the text box would scale with the type inside of it. And that if this text box scales, then this other line moves down according to it. However, that may work, it may not work. I think it's worth to try out if you have experience, that level of experience with expressions in After Effects. And if it works, then that's awesome. If it doesn't, then you're kind of at the limitations of Lottie. And this is when you would turn it into a spec file and hand that off to the developers to implement with like native animations using CSS or Swift, whatever, depending on the environment that they're working in. And if you were to implement this natively, say that your text animation really is like super complex and it's a little bit out of scope for the developers to hand code, you could just export just this as its own Lottie file. Understand that this entire composition size is going to be the dimensions or the ratio of what your Lottie file is going to take up. And so if you really only need this to take up the space of the text, then you would want to scale down your composition. And an easy way to do that is to use the region of interest tool, and you can just get around exactly where you need it for your animation. You can go to composition and crop comp to region of interest. And now our composition is just the size of this little animation. And so now this can more easily fit into place without any extra cropping or anything like that in your production environment. That's dynamic text in a Lottie animation. As you can see, you could use this for an onboarding experience as you're welcoming a customer in by name. Or maybe you're thinking about celebrating them because they've achieved a specific thing. You can use their specific name or specific attributes of what they've done inside of your experience. And the scope of what you can animate has really expanded because now the level of effort has been reduced, and an animator or designer can come into After Effects and make something really, really delightful. So that is it. Thanks for watching, and catch you guys next time.